Hello and thanks for joining. My name is Jason Etter, and I'm Vice President Client Services at Profound Cloud. Today's session is covering how to build an operations manual in Google Sites. I'll be addressing how Google Sites tackles the need to store pertinent internal documents, policies, and procedures through Profound Cloud's proven best practice in successfully deploying Google Sites for an organization. Just a little housekeeping. I'll try to save some time for questions at the end, but do feel free to ask questions throughout. If you look in your chat bar for GoToWebinar, you're going to see a link here, goo.gl/slides/tr6rkg. And right in there, you can ask questions throughout the webinar. I'll stop during it if I see something that's really pertinent that I should jump off of. But otherwise, I'm going to try to address them at the end. This session is being recorded, so in the case that you want to share this with some of your colleagues after the fact, I'll make sure that you get a copy. Also, I want to note that on June 13th of this year, so 2016, Google revealed a dramatic and widely asked for update to Google Sites. Before discussing our proven practice of utilizing Google Sites as an operations manual, the first thing I want to do is address this update because it is timely and important. So let's dive into the new user interface, which is substantially different than what you might expect to see today. So Google has made a substantial update to the look and inner workings of Google Sites. They've added real-time editing, instant mobile optimization, complete integration with Google Apps, and an even easier interface. The new version of Sites will make the creation of a site as easy as it is to create a Google Doc, slide, or spreadsheet. They're adding drag and drop features, intelligent copy-paste functionality that can actually auto-detect bad font colors like white font on white background and actually fix it. This is pretty cool stuff. It's also worth repeating how important real-time editing is to sites. It's become commonplace for docs, slides, and sheets, and will feel all the more natural and efficient to expand in sites. Mobile optimization is something that I've found a little irritating in the past with sites. Although there have been small improvements, it just didn't carry the same caliber of optimization that Gmail delivers. So finally, that has changed. Whether on a tablet, a laptop, or smartphone, your intranet site, your operations manual will look and feel as it should, depending on the device that you're using. Another substantial change is sites will be accessible from Drive. Just like when you click Create to start a new doc or spreadsheet, you can create a site. Further, for Google Apps Unlimited users, sites will now be included in the Unlimited package. For non-Google Sites users, the storage will be lumped into the same quota that you currently use for Drive. This also makes ownership transfers as easy as transferring ownership in Drive. So that's the snapshot that I wanted to give you. If this is something that you weren't expecting or you weren't aware of, let me point you towards the early adopter link because it's something that you could learn a little bit more about. So just like the questions, I'm going to post the access to the early adopter site. So from that link in the chat bar of GoToWebinar, you'll see a way to learn more about the early adopter and also just learn a little bit more about what's coming in sites. Okay, so I just wanted to do that. Now, as we look at the Google Apps Suite, there's so much to consider. We have emails, files, calendars, forms, and images that all relate to the processes and policies that can become overwhelming to manage and maintain in an orderly fashion. Further, each application within the suite adds beneficial efficiencies within your organization. But today, we're going to talk about how sites can benefit you by creating a central repository for those processes, manuals, and handbooks, a hub for your operations. Organizing all of the pertinent operational data is no small feat. In fact, this is why, so often, it gets pushed aside and saved for another day. However, not having a central repository or hub for operations can lead to challenging onboarding and offboarding procedures. Some of you may find the process of onboarding and offboarding challenging. These tasks can become overwhelming quickly, especially when there's time constraints. In addition to the processes where all of the necessary documents, such as an employee handbook, is the right version, and are there other insurance and tax documentations that need to be completed on day one? Information can quickly become out of date and disorganized. And I just can't tell you how often in previous places of employment it was next to impossible to ensure that I had the right version of our pitch deck or media kit. So let's talk about how to accomplish some of these annoyances here. So the way the sites works and functions today doesn't necessarily answer the challenges HR and organizational leaders are after. Sites like Drive gives anyone the freedom to create, edit, and share their own content. Although it's great to have such freedom, it might not be ideal for operational purposes. We also hear that sharing and collaboration is not something that you want for all content to be available to everyone who accesses this. And also, just the ability to create or delete a site in minutes is a great feature, but maybe isn't exactly functional for what we're trying to accomplish here. We hear from leadership that a central location to store and access relevant information is a must. And also, such information is highly sensitive, and only the right people should have access to edit and have those editing capabilities. So you want to protect that data. And they want some type of way to ensure that the information is actually being read and the right people are being notified of new information available. So Profound Cloud, we were faced with this interesting dilemma. On the one hand, Google has given us this great tool to create project sites, to store and share information from an entire app suite. However, from a leadership standpoint, the traditional thoughts behind an intranet that require management and permissioning gets a little lost in the shuffle. But we think there's a way to take advantage of the freedom while also securing and organizing the information as well. So here's what we're going to talk about. First and foremost, this isn't a simple plug-and-play task. It requires serious consideration and planning. Without it, you'll end up being no better off than you are today. Next, we'll discuss building out a table of contents. This will be critical in architecting your operations site. We'll also talk about the type of content that should be added to the site, especially the dashboard, which we'll talk about, as the goal is not only to have this site serve as an operational hub, but also a relied upon location for your staff that they depend on. Lastly, we'll touch on some of our best practices in permissioning with Google Sites to ensure that the content is both accessible and only editable by those who should. As explained, planning is the most critical piece to this puzzle. If you thought you could get out of it and just download a template from us, well, I'm sorry, you're out of luck. We will give you some guidelines to help kick the work off in the right direction, though. And here's some guidelines. An operations site should be owned by a non-human admin account. This is going back to general IT best practices, but is something that gets overlooked when focusing on the newness or work involved in deploying Google Apps across a domain. You want to separate the super user accounts from the day-to-day work. You also want to grant view access so that everyone in the organization can find this site. We can get more granular about editing permissions later. And you'll want to customize these permissions so that only a non-admin or non-human account can add and remove who has access. So the same person that owns the site should be the same person, or account, I shouldn't say person, in order to make these different permissions in place. Okay? So next in planning, you'll need to consider what the landing page should represent. We prefer to consider the landing page for an operations manual more of a dashboard. So with this, think about the items that matter to everyone of the organization. This list will probably grow exponentially, so be sure to trim it back when you're done. Simple is always better in this case. Try to keep it less than 10 items at most. 5 or 6 is actually preferred. I would say 5. And lastly, we like to think of the term, think like a Martian. Let's expand on that. So thinking like a Martian is a helpful metaphor. Imagine this is the first day on the job. In short, you're clueless and haven't a clue about anything that should be around or that you should be accessing or who your team is. Who do you speak to? What do you need to do to get your job done? You might ask, do I need to read and sign the employee handbook? How many tax forms or non-disclosure agreements do I need to fill out? Where do I get my computer? Do I get a computer? What is my phone line? How do I get access to my benefits? Are there benefits? And most importantly, where can I go to make sure I understand and learn what is expected of me? All of these are extremely important questions and need to be answered. So thinking like a Martian is really the best starting point because every employee needs to access the same information. The worst thing you could do is assume every employee knows everything there is to know. That would be great, but it's just not a reality. So now that you're thinking like a Martian, let's further organize your thoughts. I like to think the same way that I would when architecting a proposal or presentation. I've got a lot of points that I want to make, but I don't really know how I want to organize it or what order that should be in. So let's try to get them all out and build a table of contents. I think this is a good methodology here. So when first starting out, right, it's likely that you've got multiple critical elements that come to mind as must-haves when accessing your operations site. You want to be certain departmental processes, HR documents such as your employee handbook, access to your healthcare portal, sales materials, customer names, prospects, social media policies, etc., etc. It gets overwhelming real quick. All of this is important, but it's obviously too much to organize. So remember, think like a Martian. First, let's figure out what the top 5 items that impact most, if not all of your organization are. Got them? Okay. Well, let's call that the dashboard. Next, organize all of those other critical items into a simple and intuitive path. As a guide, we see businesses using client services, internal IT, HR, finance, sales, and marketing as a good place to start. Now, don't worry. All of the time you spent gathering the other items, the must-haves, will have their place. But just right now, let's just find a way to just consolidate and simplify the different areas of interest that you would want your organization to go to. So in order to get to the next level of organizing your table of contents, you can start to place those must-haves under the umbrella of the top levels. So for example, in HR, you might place your payroll, health benefits, and employee handbook. There's just some examples right here. But don't forget, though, that Google search is also built within sites. So even if after all this work is complete, your staff can still search for exactly what they're looking for within the site, which is really quite nice. And then once you get your top level and sub-level sorted out, the ops site can start to take shape and have this clean and clear look. So for example, here's what our ops site looks like when hovering over the sales level. As you can see here, we have our dashboard to start, client services, HR, sales, marketing, facilities, which we changed to different than I explained to you earlier, and all of you will be able to customize this to yourself, IT and finance. Under sales, we have 4 simple bullets: reporting, sales process, training materials, and order management. Each one of these takes us to a different portion of the site and has different levels within themselves. But it makes it easy to just understand from a Martian perspective where I need to go. If I'm on day 1 and I'm a sales representative, I'm going to go to the sales process so I understand exactly what it is. And then I'm likely going to go over to training materials too and then learn how to place orders. Okay? And then I want to see how well I'm doing, so I'll go to reporting. Okay. So now that the conceptual architecture is in place, let's now discuss some items that are going to aid in ensuring your staff depends on utilizing this for operations. So one of the tactics that we prefer to use is through dynamic content. This is something we recommend to all of our partners who have just adopted to Google Sites. We want you to add useful and necessary dynamic content. For starters, stop emailing reports. Have them located on a page within the site for staff to track and monitor throughout the work week. Further, add useful information such as business contact information. We keep a running list of our clients and projects in sites, so it's easy to access pertinent information. You could do this with pipeline reviews or financial discussions. Remember, both Drive and Sites allow for granular permissioning, so if architected correctly, only the right groups will be able to access the data. So don't be fearful, and we'll talk about secure authentication later, that the wrong people will see this information that you're putting here or have edit access. So I like that our team, for example, rather than asking where something is, they just know to go to our operations site. And we recommend to embed Drive files in folder structures within sites. It's so helpful to have project or process information within a page, right? Adding the respective data in Drive only further enhances that same experience. So just as an example here, just to walk you through, Google makes it really easy to add this type of dynamic content, such as you just click on Insert, select Drive, then boom, you click on Spreadsheet. Alternatively, you can insert charts, graphs, and other living material. It never gets stagnant because these reports aren't images or PDF files. And as you hold your sales meetings, what you can do is just get real-time results by pulling directly from the pipeline, ROI calculator, or other order management spreadsheets that you might manage in Drive. And look, there's a lot of opportunity for deeper integrations. Remember, to take, if you wanted to make the dashboard really pop, for example, with content that's relevant to the whole org, use things like Google Groups for events, mass communications, organizational updates, reports, and live charts. Make it easy by linking to external links to your team, and make sure that they depend on adding a quick reference guide to health and payroll portals. Make sure that all the work you put in the table of contents is also included in the dashboard. That'll make it even easier to navigate through the operations site. Embed relevant Google Drive folders within each page. The more you can isolate pertinent content, the more likely your staff will depend on the site. Place commonly used documents, spreadsheets, and presentations right into the site's page. It's so helpful for staff to learn what they're expected to do by scrolling through the process you've put in place. So you have, for example, the site itself. Like, let's go back to the example of that sales process. So within the sales process page, you'll actually have a presentation. And that presentation may be your pitch deck. And then underneath it will be some content explaining what it represents. Then you can embed a video or a tutorial of how to enter an order or something of that nature. Talk about your philosophies, etc. And all this information likely is stored in Google Drive. But to place it on a site or a page within the site, to walk you through step by step the process, thinking like a Martian again and thinking about day one, this really helps enable your staff in terms of what they're trying to do. And again, I already said this earlier, but don't neglect Google Groups for announcements, and add a place for staff to scroll through them as needed. It's very helpful, especially for onboarding and offboarding, or onboarding in particular, so they can see what they might have missed. There's other integration points as well that are very commonly used that are excellent for Google Sites. Lucidchart, for example, is something that our team uses regularly to clearly lay out our internal processes for project work, sales lead generation, and support. If any of our staff members is curious about what they're expected to do, especially the support team, for example, when they receive a call and what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to log a ticket, what the time frame is, their SLA expectations, and all the processes, we've laid it out very clearly in our operations manual, so there's no question what is expected of them. We also use Google Forms for expense reports and reimbursements. So rather than going to Google Drive and trying to find the form, our team knows to simply go onto the operations site and enter that data from the receipt. And then this extends for day off requests, support requests, and new hardware as well. Lastly, we love keeping vacations, days off, and project events on a calendar for everyone to see. It's very simple and very easy. Okay, now let's talk about developing an operational site with a manageable and fluid authentication plan. So role-based permissioning has been part of IT best practices for a long time. But what we see since specifically for administrating and making sure making sure. And so we do not recommend using your basic email distribution groups that you might use for email purposes for this. And this is specifically why, when naming, we give it the name role, so that there's a clear distinction in the admin panel between your role groups for sites versus your distribution lists in Gmail. Another consideration is to ensure these groups are restricted, so they won't be used as an email distribution list. So once you do away with the single user permissions and enable role-based permissions, you will end up with a dramatically cleaner permissions list. You have the non-human admin account who will be owning this folder and permissions given to the specific role groups. And this is important. So when you have your staff that accesses your Google site, for example, and they see the share button, they actually won't be able to do anything with that if set up properly. So they can click on it all they want, but nothing will actually happen. If anything, it'll just give them a little notification or pop up that says this is managed in a specific way that is through your admin team. So you can actually set it up that people can't just share content or pages to anyone. Only the admin will be able to do that. So some other things to keep in mind. Using role-based permissions makes for a significantly faster employee onboarding and offboarding process. Again, remember the Martian. So when Sally comes aboard or Marvin comes aboard, we don't need to think about the 17 to 30 folders that she needs to have access to. We don't have to think about what the process might be, all the emails that they have to get, etc. We just need to understand what role she plays. And keeping a cleaner permissions list is also significantly easier to manage across the board, regardless of how small or large your organization is. Okay? And the last thing any kind of admin wants to see is a 60-line item permissions list with various users spread across, which makes it really impossible to digest or report on. And as discussed, using restricted Google Apps groups is really a best practice, and we highly recommend to make everything that we just said much easier, especially when you're trying to restrict access, but make sure that there's view access to certain portions of the site. So what's next? Consider the following, right? For example, if you go, we also recommend too that you can change the URL of the site, for example. So as you see this really long Google site, sites.google.com. You can either manually customize the site, for example. It could be sites.google.com/Acme operations manual. You can set that up, or you can just simply use something like a URL shortener and share it. Make that part of the process that your team would be able to have access to. That just makes it easier for onboarding to be smoother, and then people will be able to access that, right? Excellent. So what is next, right, in terms of getting started? In addition to all the things we just talked about, how are we going to do this, right? Well, the only way this formula works is if you're completely invested in the work that it entails. Understand the value of performing a full audit in order to properly document this new architecture. Educate leadership and colleagues on the implications of making such a switch, and train. Please, just stop thinking that your organization already has a handle on using Google Sites or any of the Google Apps Suite for that matter. They probably do, but providing training that surrounds working and accessing this new site is very different, and they need to see and adapt to this vision in order for it to be successful. And make sure to implement these processes, make these portions of the site as part of your daily routine. Some examples I've given is showing the actual, having the actual sales pipeline meeting based upon something in the site, using the reporting features within the sales link in order to have those meetings and make it dependable. We actually have a lot of the project and client information located on our operations manual too, and making that the only place where this information can be found. So remember to think Martian, right? When Marvin first steps foot at your organization, he's clueless as to who your customers, partners, suppliers, and team members are. He could get easily inundated with welcome messages, login credentials, and other various data points. A simple, easy way to manage operations accessed and managed by your Google Apps admin will substantially reduce the uncertainty of how to communicate, share, and access policies, procedures, and data. Okay? So again, really understanding the planning that goes into play, and we'll do a recap in a moment. Of course, too, if you would like more help, we do this all the time, right? So we certainly invite you to consider partnering with Profound Cloud and enabling our Google Apps enhanced admin support, which includes our hands-on white glove support, along with the dedicated account manager to provide monthly platform updates, access to our support specialists, and full support across Google for Work. Furthermore, we also offer full staff support should you be interested in mitigating the responsibilities of Google support as the platform continues to evolve. So what we would do if you worked with us is we would first do an internal audit of the current usage and information, the data that is stored and needs to be regularly accessed. So what we talked about earlier in terms of that planning and developing that table of contents, we would do that work with you. We need to understand if there's any security risks or third-party applications that are being used, and we can start to address that and make those the short links and really organize it in a nice fashion for you. Then what we'd like to do is build it out and configure the actual architecture for your organization. So we can include drive folder structures. We can also include just the dashboard and the different elements of the site to make it really simple and easy to access for your staff as they're moving forward from that Martian phase into the actual relying on the site on a daily basis. And then, of course, we work with you on migration and then training. Really, you have to understand the security requirements that may prevent us from actually touching your physical data, but we'll be happy to work with you and architect a way that you can access, have that data available to your staff without us actually having to touch it. And we can provide templates and training sessions and make it as and even document and user-friendly documentation that'll make it easier for you too. And most of these sessions that we work with can take anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. And we'll actually provide you really comprehensive documentation on how we plan to architect this just to make it fluid so that you can reference it at a later date. Here's a simpler version of the model, of course. The two most pertinent aspects is the initial discovery discussions with departmental leaders, and then just the customized training sessions and documentation to encourage and excite the staff. So remember, this isn't a simple plug-and-play task. It requires a lot of planning. Okay, so without it, you'll end up being no better than you are today. And once you get your thoughts together, develop that table of contents. The table of contents really is going to help you understand how you're going to architect the entire site structure, right? And then consider what type of content should be added to the site, especially to the dashboard. If it's dynamic, it's going to be more user-friendly, and taking advantage of what Google Drive already offers, dynamic is very easy because all of the files are living and they're not static. So the goal is not to have the site serve as an operational hub only, but really as a tool for your staff to depend on. So in addition to the think like a Martian idea, yes, on day one, we want this site to be something that on day one, it answers every question any staff member should have. But that also includes day 2 and onward. Lastly, really, we want to utilize role-based groups for authentication within sites. This will ensure that the content is both accessible and only editable by the right staff members. So lastly, please consider working with us. We understand this process deeply, and we provide substantial guidance for architecting an operations site and also the Google Drive architecture as well. For any questions like this, please reach out directly to Kyle@profoundcloud.com, and I'll even put it here in the chat, and then we'll get to questions. Excellent. Okay, so I see we have a lot of questions, so let's get to them. Okay, here. So for example, there is a question, if you store data in Drive and embed it in Google Sites, data in the document, spreadsheet, etc. is not indexed for Google Sites. So Google Sites search results can't find it unless your keyword is in the title. Is that still true? Has that changed in the new version? That's a great question. I'll have to, because you're asking about the new Google Sites, I'll actually have to look that up for you and see if I can find a solid answer. So I will take note of that specific question and make sure I include it in the future. So my apologies, I don't have that answer for the new version of Google Sites, but I will find that answer for you. Someone is interested in seeing what the dashboard looks like. All right. I unfortunately cannot show you our dashboard, but the closest I can do is jump over to the slide that talks about it. So let's just go back to here. Let's see. Oh yes, here we go. So this is a fraction of what the dashboard would look like. So when you first land on the dashboard, you would see everything that is relevant to the different areas of the site. Then I would recommend inserting something like a groups feed, so something like an all staff group, and have that accessible to the organization. A chart, a graph, as I showed you in the earlier example, that would indicate something that is relevant to your external communications or client sales, etc. And then on the left-hand column, I would put your table of contents so that people can really visualize what is, the depth of that dashboard, which should be very helpful as well. And additionally, you can put something. You can even include Google Plus community information. You can also include calendars and other pertinent information too. Google Sites also allows you to do some using HTML. So if you want to include a chart or results from something outside of Google, you're also capable of doing that too. Just as an example, we have for our support team, we have something that's called gold stars. So whenever we get a specific team member gets praise from one of our clients, that count in tally actually shows up on our dashboard on a regular basis so people can see it, which is actually really pretty great. Another question is about how should news posts be handled in the new design now that the old template isn't possible? That's a great question, and that's actually something that I should have talked about too. That the updated version of Google Sites, although it is much different, the old version is still available. Now, because it is in early adopter, that means it's not the full-blown version yet. So if you've been fortunate enough to test out Google Sites in the early adopter, bear in mind that there are many, many updates and changes to come. So things that are no longer possible, there is an opportunity to submit feedback to Google. I've already done that myself. I found that some of the pieces, such as the widgets that I rely on heavily, I didn't see that currently or a way to access that in Google Sites, the new version, and I reached out to them just to make a comment, and I'm sure that type of functionality will be noted for future releases. Question is whether or not this slideshow will be available after the presentation. I am recording this session, and I will be making sure that everyone who has been part of this will have access to it. The next question, great question, is will the current Google Sites be migrated to the new layout? So part of the announcement on that link I shared does say that just like when the old version of Google Docs, spreadsheets, and presentations, it will allow you at some point in the not so distant future to upgrade from the previous version to the newer version. That is not currently available, but that is absolutely on the roadmap, so great question. Yes, last question here is the new Google Sites seems to have far less functionality than the existing version. And so just to answer this question, this is exactly what I was touching on before, is again, this is beta, right? So although I was pleased that I was able to walk you through some of the new functionality, please bear in mind that the reason why it's called an early adopter is because it's not the full-blown version. There will be updates, there will be more features, there will be constant updates before the official full release comes out. So please do bear that in mind. Okay? Let's see here. Oh, the best way to integrate Google Plus with Sites, there are, just like I showed you earlier in terms of integrating Google Plus, there are ways to add in the current version of Google Sites. You can either embed it through one of the widget options, and I also believe there's some integration with Google Plus as well. I highly recommend an alternative to that question in terms of this is a little bit out of scope of this conversation, but I highly recommend taking a really deep look at the at the communities that Google Plus offers. It's very easy to create a community and lock down the content and restrict it only to your domain. And this is a great place to communicate, share links that are relevant, information, praise of staff, new clients, things of that nature that will not be viewable or shareable outside of your domain. So it's a really nice way and creative way of seeing and sharing content such as URLs and images and polls and things of that nature to communicate with your team that's not just email and or Google Hangouts. So I would highly recommend taking a look at the communities aspect of Google+. I found that it's been very successful for our team on many levels. So again, this session was recorded, and I'll make sure that everyone has access to it. I appreciate everyone's time. I think this has been a great session. I wanted to keep it less than an hour so that people can get back to their what it is that they're doing, and appreciate everyone's time. Hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.